Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this is our Midrash for Parashat Breisheet. This week, we're going to be talking about the Nephilim, the Kabbalistic rabbis who communicate with the Nephilim, and both houses of Israel, both Judah and Joseph. So for those of you who are joining us only for the Nephilim portion, first we're going to do a quick Aviv barley calendar update and just a quick calendar update in general. So if you want to jump ahead, you come to the second marker there. We'll begin talking about the Nephilim in the Torah portion. We're going to see what the Torah has to say about them. And then in the second half of that, we'll be talking about what the Kabbalistic rabbis are witnessing. We've run out of time this week. We had some quotations in the Haftarah that deal with the divine council. So we'll talk about the divine council, and you can read those on your own for further witnessing. We're going to dip into 4 verses in the Brit Chadasha just because we ran out of time. So we're going to try to bring you our best. This is a very full-packed parasha. So first, before we talk about the Nephilim and the Kabbalistic rabbis, first let's talk about the Aviv barley calendar update. So for those of you who are new, there are many who wonder, what is Aviv barley and why are we talking about an Aviv barley calendar instead of talking about the Jewish calendar? And just to keep it simple, there was a calendar that was commanded in the first 5 books of Moses that uses the barley and then the seasons to establish the timing of the head of the year. Brother Judah doesn't follow that system any longer. So after Brother Judah was removed from the land after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, they had to come up with a different mathematical calendar that would be able to approximate the ripening of the barley outside the land of Israel, because they were barred from the land of Israel. So for its day, it was very advanced, and it was of good value and use until Israel came back to the land of Israel and was then able to go back to the original Aviv barley calendar system. But they're still on this calendar, which is based on the equinoxes. And there's also, we don't have time to unpack it here, but there's also a tradition that the year starts in the 7th month. And we don't understand how you can start a year in the 7th month, but that's when they typically start their Genesis cycle. They start the Torah portion at the end of summer rather than at the start of summer. So we see things differently, and they provide a lovely, I've read the rabbinical explanations for why do they start the year at the end of summer? Why do they start the year in the 7th month? And they're beautiful. They're very logical. It's just that we have a hard time matching them up to Scripture. So what we read is in Shemot, or Exodus chapter 12, starting in verse 1, Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aharon while they were still in the land of Egypt. That was end of winter, start of summer. And he says, this month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So for us, we can read these beautiful explanations as to why we should start the year in the 7th month instead of in the 1st month. But no matter how beautiful the explanation, we don't like to transgress the face value of the text. So that's it. That's how we see it. There's good reasons why we see things this way. So in Colossians chapter 2, starting in verse 16, now this is the King James version of Shaliach Shaul, or the Apostle Paul's writings. And what he's telling us is that we shouldn't let anyone tell us what to do, judge us, or direct us in regards to meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day or a festival day, a feast day rather, or of the new moon or of the Sabbath. And it inserts the word days. That's a supplied word. It says, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. It says, and again, the word is there is supplied. Well, if we know what we're reading here, and we understand the principle that we're not supposed to add anything to Yahweh's word, and we're not supposed to take anything away. Well, so we have 2 words that have been added. So let's take those away. So we end up with a clean text. And what it says without those two supplied words is, don't let anyone judge you or direct you or tell you what to do with regard to the meat you eat, particularly with regards to clean and unclean meats, or in drink, or in respect of a feast day, a set apart day, or of the new moon days, or of Shabbat, because these are prophetic shadow pictures of things still to come. It says, therefore, don't let anyone tell you what to do regarding these things, but only the body of Mashiach. So only let the body of Mashiach, therefore, tell you what to do with regard to the foods and the drinks, especially the festive ones, and also with respect to a set apart day or new moon or of the Sabbath. So because why? Because they're prophetic shadow pictures of things still to come. So if these are prophetic shadow pictures of things still to come, then we need to be in the right places at the right times. And we can only do that if we are obeying his instructions. If we deviate from his instructions or we deviate from his definitions, we can miss his timing when he intends to show up. And there's a lot of symbolism involved in here. So we know that the feast days and the offerings, these are all prophetic shadow pictures of things that are still to come. Well, one of the things that came in the first century was Yeshua. So Yeshua was the fulfillment of the wave sheaf offering. So he was the very first sheaf of symbolic of the very first sheaf of perfect barley. Also, we'll see later, symbolic of the perfect wheat. But not in this video series, but we cover this in other places. Okay, I pray I will say this the right way because we want understanding to come about. We don't want to cause conflict, but we do want to bring about understanding. So just give a quick review of what most of the Karaite certainly, and then most of the Messianic barley inspectors, what they're going for. Well, we talk about this in some detail in the study on first fruits or false fruits. You can find it on YouTube, and then also we have the transcript and the video embedded on the website. But basically, the problem, what you have going here is that, just as we have seen, that there is prophetic shadow picture significance to all of the things that we're commanded to do. These are not trivial things. These are not inconsequential things, but that we're commanded to do certain things because they have spiritual and prophetic future significance. So we need to be doing these things. And we see that this extends also to the barley first fruits. So there's a first fruit model and there's a false fruit model that has been adopted in the Talmud, and hence by the Karaites, and hence by the Messianics, or most of the Messianics. So we don't want to inflame anything. We just want to speak the truth in love. But there are several things that we need to see regarding the first fruit offering. And one of the things about the first fruits is that they should truly be first. So here we have in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 20, it tells us that now Mashiach is risen from the dead, and he's become the first of the first fruits. He's become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. He was the very first one. Okay. Verse 23 says, but each one in his own order. First, you have Mashiach Nagid, the first fruits. And then afterwards, you have those who are Mashiach Nagids when he comes. Okay, but notice what we're saying here. Okay, first, you have the very first one, Mashiach Nagid, and because he's the first fruits, that clears the way for everyone else who comes at the time of his coming. And this is precisely the problem with the Karaite and the mass majority Messianic model. Is that they don't use that order. They have a different order. They invert the order. So let's continue on here. So before we talk about that, we need to talk about how Yeshua tells us that with a wise farmer, and this is Mark chapter 4 and verse 29, he says, with a wise farmer, when the grain ripens, immediately the farmer is going to put in the sickle because the harvest has come. And the reason why is that barley and other grains, they don't stay that long in the head. So once the barley reaches the appropriate stage, you need to cut it then or within a span of a very few days so that it doesn't then become brittle and drop and fall to the ground and you lose your crop. So, but immediately you put in the sickle. Now, this is one of the things that perhaps we can understand why the Karaites might not factor Yeshua's words into account, but we can't understand why the Messianic barley searchers don't take these words into account. Brought this up with them, and they don't hear this. So one of the things that if this is helpful, one of the things that both the Karaites and the majority Messianic barley observers will point to, and they have a different model, they have a different concept of what constitutes Aviv barley. And their model of what constitutes Aviv barley is that you have to have enough Aviv barley to feed the entire nation by the time you declare Aviv, or at least by the time you are going to present your wave sheaf offering. And where they get this, so I hope I can state this appropriately, my understanding, this is what they say from their literature, where they get this is from Joshua chapter 5, starting in verse 10, which says, "Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Pesach on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day." There's several important things we can notice about this passage. So since they ate the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, that means that that the Pesach was on Sabbath and that they were able to offer the wave sheaf offering the very next day. So, but the fact is that they were able to eat the produce of the land on that day. And so what the Karaites and what the majority Messianics will say is that you have to have this ready to harvest type scenario, or you can't declare, because Joshua 5 verses 10 and 11 prove that you have to have these kind of conditions. You must be able to cut the harvest so that you can then produce the first fruits offering from the harvest. And we say, for us, yes, we agree that this condition existed, that the harvest was ready to cut the very next day. But, it's like we know from history, we know from this passage that the Pesach was on Shabbat, but not every Pesach is on Shabbat. We know that Yeshua was cut off in the middle of the week, so fourth day of the week, but not every Pesach is on the fourth day of the week. So what it comes down to effectively is we believe they're extrapolating too much. We believe that they're saying this is the condition that it was when Israel entered the land, therefore this must be the condition before we can declare the Aviv. And we say that can't be right for reasons we're going to talk about next, because it's going to be too damaging to poor barley farmers. Okay, so now let's talk about what Joshua 5, verse 10 and 11 looks like with regards to a modern day harvest. This is just a standard bell curve distribution scale I just pulled off of Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons. And what this shows, typically, scientists use these to graph averages, and they use them to graph what's called standard distributions. And what this means is that with an average thing, whatever it is you're talking about, if it has to deal with the law of averages, there's typically a way to capture the bulk, the core of it, so to speak, and then to capture most of it, and then it takes much longer to capture all of it, and they can measure all these things with statistical analysis and all that. But what I want you to notice here is that the Karaite model is effectively this kind of a model. And what they're looking to do is they're looking to maximize the harvest. So when the Karaites go out there looking for Aviv barley, what they are saying, what they are looking for is they are looking for huge swathes, like large fields of barley that either are ripe for the harvest or will be ripe for the harvest very soon on the day of the wave sheaf. So the problem is that, as Yeshua said, barley doesn't stay in the head very long. So if barley ripens over 2 or perhaps 3 months in Israel, really you don't have enough time. There isn't a possible time to wait until the main bulk of the barley harvest is going to be harvested, but you don't damage the farmers with the earliest ripening crops. And so this is what happens every year. And this is why we have a difference between the Karaite calendars and also those mainstream messianics who follow them versus those of us who follow the true first fruits, the true wave sheaf, is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the farmers with the earliest ripening barley aren't going to lose their crops, which is exactly what happens under the Karaite and the mainstream messianic models. So here you see sort of an artificial, just a red arrow, just a red cutoff line. So if you are trying to maximize a Karaite or a Messianic Aviv, so you're looking for something much later, and that's why the Karaite Aviv is typically a month later than our Aviv, is because they typically sacrifice the very first of the barley to come ripe that lies to the left of the red arrow. So in fact, in some reports we'll talk about in just a minute, they actually boast. I mean, they will say, see, you can know that we're in the Aviv now because you see this barley over here, that barley has already fallen to the ground. So that barley has already been lost. That's how you can know that this is really, truly the main crop. So it's a very different look. It's a very different perspective as to what constitutes Aviv barley. And I believe one thing that would help, so of course everyone believes their position, everyone wants to prove their position is right, but I believe one thing that would help is if people could call it a Karaite Aviv, or if they could call it a first fruits Aviv, just to differentiate. Because we have different observers all claiming to represent the barley, but they're all using different definitions. And this is one of the things that Nazarene Israel has been working to try to reduce the confusion, to try to help standardize. But this is the point, that what we're seeing right here is there's a certain cutoff that no matter how you try to balance it, because you only have a week or two with the barley. And if you're talking in terms of delaying a month, I mean, sometimes the red arrow can move more to the right, so to speak, and you can lose a lot of that earliest barley. So here's just another depiction. It's just another way to look. They cut the standard deviation, or 2 standard deviations. So what we're saying here is that just however the weather happens to fall and the barley happens to fall, under the Karaite and the mainstream messianic model, if you're going to use that model where you're seeking to bring in the bulk of the crop and then to make an artificial first fruits sheaf from that, you're going to lose the farmers with the earliest ripening barley are going to lose their crop. And that's ironic because everyone's always going to the Gaza, everyone's always going to the Jordan River Valley to look for Aviv barley. And then in the Aviv, or in the Karaite model, they just let it fall to the ground. They don't take it into account at all. Well, one of the verses that gets overlooked or broken is Deuteronomy, or Devarim 16 and verse 9. And we have, this is one of our video series on the feasts of the first month. And I recommend this video. This is what people are breaking all the time when they're keeping the Karaite or the mainstream messianic model. So let's take a look at it. Devarim 16 and verse 9 says, "You shall count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks, or Shavuot, or Pentecost." So what this says is, when you begin cutting your grain, count 7 weeks, there's Shavuot. Okay, well, that's pretty simple. Okay, so once you start cutting, you count 7 weeks, and there you go. Okay, well, the Karaites say you don't have to do it that way. And that's because the Talmud says you don't have to do it that way. So we talk about this in our study on Josephus, the Talmud, and the Omer. There's a uh, very interesting barley episode we had back in 2021. So that would be, oh mercy, 3781. Was very interesting. So we had we'll talk about her in just a moment, a Messianic sister, Becca Bitterman, who had been doing some extensive research, some very good, very top quality research. And then we had let's leave it anonymous here. We had another barley researcher going in behind her, seeking to disqualify her reporting. And I believe that the main cause of this is that both groups want to claim the right to the term Aviv. So you got an Aviv calendar and an Aviv calendar, but they have different definitions of what constitutes Aviv. So I would like to ask for everyone's prayers that we would all find a good way to differentiate between the Karaite Aviv barley calendar and the true first fruits Aviv, or the first of the first fruits Aviv barley calendar. So I believe that would simplify the discussion considerably. Okay, so now let's talk about the Aviv barley conditions in the land of Israel this year. So we're going to take some screenshots from a video by Sister Becca Bitterman. And this is her Aviv barley update from February 27th, 2025. And she's got a lot of good information in there. One of the things she's trying to show here is that it still seems early to her, so to speak. In her words, it seemed more like the 11th month rather than the 12th month for a normal year. The reason being is that ordinarily, and other investigators have noticed this also, other barley searchers, but typically speaking, when it's time for the barley to be Aviv, typically speaking, there's a little bit more new growth on the older grapes. So it still seems early to her. That's a paraphrase. She also bases that on the fact that the flax still seems young. We also know that from scripture. In Shemot, or Exodus chapter 9 and verse 31, it tells us, now the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was in the head, meaning it was fruiting effectively, and the flax was in the bud, meaning it was flowering. So it says, but the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they are later crops. They come up around Shavuot. So they were still young. They were still pliable when the hail hit. So they were not struck, whereas the flax and the barley were struck. So if we saw Aviv barley now, we would expect to see more advanced flax. Well, it doesn't always work out in practice the way it happens in theory. In fact, it's usually very different. So, but Sister Bitterman has located a very large patch of very early barley. So it's earlier than everything else, but at the time she took the footage, we weren't sure if the weather was going to get warm or if the weather was going to continue colder. So we didn't really know, but the weather has since turned warm. So it looks like this patch may complete, and that's good. The only thing is, so she took this again. If you're watching this on Shabbat, this was 9 days ago. So the seed pods had formed, but there was no liquid and there was no starch, there was no meat, there was no substance, so to speak. Now, we know this is from our study on Aviv barley simplified. If you have the anther opens and there's fertilization, then it's going to close and form a seed pod. And the way it progresses is first it will pump fluid into the seed pod, and then it'll progressively pump more and more starch to where on day 8 it will look like milk. And then it will continue to get harder and harder. Around day 10, 11, 12 starts to look like a worm. And then continuing on, you get soft dough, and then Aviv is effectively medium dough. So this is an average chart, average climate conditions. Again, it doesn't work out that way in real life, but effectively about 2.5 weeks. Once you have a closed seed pod, the barley can ripen up and can happen very quickly. Not that it necessarily will, but that it can happen quickly. Well, again, we weren't sure whether the weather was going to be colder or warmer, but it looks like the weather has gotten warm. So her video is taken on the top line there. It's on the 5th day of the week. There's nothing there. But then on the first day of the week, that's when we had the new moon day. And so looks like good weather temperatures, 70, 75, 68, 70, 60. So low 70s. And then next week, it's progressed a high 70s and even 80s. So it's very possible that this barley could finish up. Now, may Yahweh please help me to say this appropriately. It's never come to a head before. Sister Bitterman has always inspected until the 10th day of the month. And she has talked sometimes about declaring the Aviv on the retroactively going back to declare the Aviv. And I don't know how her perspective is, but from our perspective, it was more that we had been blessed to be able to talk her out of going back and retroactively declaring the Aviv just because of what confusion it would cause. However, it looks like we were not successful in talking her out of it this year. So if I can say this correctly, so what she has said is that she will go out and investigate up to the 10th day of the month. And if she finds Aviv barley up to the 10th day of the month, whether that would be she mentioned the 10th, so I put that in a red square. We count the 11th. She might have a different counting system than we do. I'm not sure. But the point is, I'm not sure how any human being can justify going back and retroactively changing the calendar month designation. But if she were to do that, then if you are a person who is following that recommendation, I mean, it's not a barley witness function, that's a priesthood function. So she's effectively, she has different theology than we do. So she's messianic. So according to her theology, there's no problem going back and retroactively declaring the Aviv. One of the problems that we have with it is both in the modern day and in ancient times, this would cause extreme extreme problems with regards to transportation. So, I mean, if she declares it on the 10th, then you would have exactly 4 days to stop what you're doing, tell your boss, you take time off work, buy airline tickets, buy hotel accommodations, travel, pack your bags, travel, get to Jerusalem, get in, over, and down in time for Shabbat. And if it turns out it's on the 11th, then you only have 3 days to do that. And we don't think that that's realistic. So it may be possible to, in the modern day, to disseminate information electronically, almost instantaneously. It may be possible for us to jump in our cars and drive up to Jerusalem in a matter of hours. But the simple fact is, back in ancient times, you're talking anywhere between 3 and 5 days to travel up to Jerusalem, plus you've got to make accommodations. I mean, the way it would actually go is, I mean, if you had barley growing in your land, the way it would actually go, if you happened to have the earliest barley, you would want to cut it. You would want to eat it. So you would talk to the priests, and they would come out and inspect the barley. And if it was, in fact, the earliest barley, then they would declare it, and you would want to get that barley declared and cleared so you could cut it before it fell out of the head and onto the ground. So there's, how do you say, there's a time element in all of these things. And if we're not going to pay attention to the time element, then, I mean, how does it work? And if Elohim gives us 14 days notice, why are we giving the people only 3 or 4 days notice? So this is something we've discussed with her several times, but so she's never anyway. The reason for all the detail, the reason we're sharing all these things is that it's one, I mean, it's a poor witness on the barley, but it's not so much a witness on the barley, it's a witness against the messianic movement. Because what we've got effectively is we've got people serving in the capacity of barley witnesses who are taking priesthood functions upon themselves. And, you know, I know I'm not the only one that has a problem with the concept that you can retroactively go back and declare the head of the month 10 days late. It's like that on Aviv 10, you're going to declare when Aviv 1 was. We don't understand that. We can't comprehend that. We don't get that. So Shemot, or Exodus chapter 12 and verse 2, Yahweh says, "This shall be the first month of the year to you. And then on the 10th of the month, every man is to take for himself a lamb. And then on the 14th, we have the Pesach." So you have effectively 2 weeks notice to get ready. And we could also point out that you do have a second Pesach for those who aren't ready in time for the first genuinely aren't ready in time for the first Pesach. But there is no provision for a second Shavuot or a second Sukkot because you have enough lead time. You're not caught by surprise. You're not caught unawares. So ordinarily speaking, 2 weeks is enough lead time, or at least Elohim seems to think so. But if you were in ancient times, your barley would be ready. The priests you'd have to notify the priesthood. The priest would have to come inspect the barley. Then the priesthood would have to meet. Then they would have to disseminate the word from Jerusalem. Back in ancient times, that would be, it depends on whether you're using runners or horses or signal fires or what you're doing, but it would have to be coordinated, and it takes time. And again, it would take time for the people to gather their things and to go up to Jerusalem. So it takes, on average, between 3 and 5 days, depending on how far you're walking. So we don't we don't understand how you can retroactively change the month. And I did ask how you can, just for example, it would be if, here we are on, I don't know where, it's like today we're on the 6th, but if it was the 11th or the 10th of the 11th, and then we decided to retroactively go back and declare the leap year for February, would be we're changing the designation of the month, but you're doing it 10 days later. It's like, how can you do that? So I've had people, I want to say things appropriately, but I've had people that they don't understand what it is that they're suggesting. So if we've got, I wish I could remember which video it is, but in one of our videos, we physically walk through the Karaite calendar. Okay, if you're a Karaite, you're going to be harvesting your crops on this day at the same time that you're in Jerusalem offering your crops. You got physical impossibilities because you can't be in both places at once. And you might think you can if you have modern transportation. It takes a few hours. But in ancient times, that wouldn't work. That's not how they would do it. And even in today's times, sure, if you live in the land of Israel and you just jump in the car, you can be there in a few hours. Maybe 3 or 4 days is enough for you. But I'll guarantee you there's people outside the land of Israel, even if they're not going anywhere, they need to give notice to their boss. It's not just and this year, with Pesach being on the weekend, it's not such a big deal. But for many, many years, Pesach is not on the weekend. And the feasts are not on the weekend. So you need to give your employer that notice. So that's not Torah. It's just common sense. It's like, how can you retroactively go back and change the month designation to add a leap year or not, so to speak? I don't know. I want to leave it there. I'm gonna try to limit the amount said, just to give a clear summary. Just because The situation that we're in, the reason for giving all of the detail is she is the only qualified barley witness in the land of Israel that we know of. The other barley groups, they have a completely different definition of Aviv. They're looking to bring in the main harvest and then produce an anti-Yeshua wave sheaf. So this is Zionism, is to bring in the harvest of Judaism, and then you can produce your Mashiach or your anti-Mashiach, so to speak. That's not how Yeshua did it. Yeshua was the first. Yeshua was the exemplar. First, he was harvested, and that clears the way for the rest of us at the time of when we come ripe. Now we also can be harvested, so to speak. So I just want to make myself clear because we're going to continue to recommend her as our barley witness, even though she has cut us completely off. So it was very surprising. Just to give a short summary time sequence. So Sister Bitterman, I don't always have time to follow every video, but when it comes Pesach time, it's important for me to double check and make sure that what we're doing is at the correct time. So one of these situations, sort of a cliffhanger or a nail biter year, because the barley, we're not sure what's going to happen. It's going to get hot. It's going to be cold. Well, what's it going to do? So then Sister Bitterman says that she's going to continue to inspect, and if she finds Aviv barley up to the 10th day of the month, she's going to retroactively declare the Aviv, which is something she's never done before. We've never been able to not talk her out of that before. So I wrote to Sister Bitterman privately to inquire, what's going on. I gently reminded her that there are many people. They need the 14-day lead time, both anciently and in the modern day. It's not, even if it's convenient for you to jump in your car, it's not convenient for all of Israel, and all of Israel needs to be our concern. So sadly, she did not answer my email. I spent hours and hours in prayer over the email. She didn't answer it. What she did instead is she posted a new and different video on her YouTube channel, which covered that topic, but she didn't even notify me that she had posted a video. Okay, well, that's a choice that she can make. So I noticed that she, again, this is something that we have discussed many times, and she's very well aware of our concern. And it's like, well, okay, so we helped get her set up. We helped her with her mass email. We helped her with some graphics. We've sent financial support for I don't know how many years. We've been going backward financially for some years ourselves, but we've continued to send financial support because we appreciate her barley reporting. Again, she's the only one. She's the only qualified witness even that we know of. So, what are we going to do? So she's not answering my emails. And I thought about it. It's like I had sent her a couple of other emails that she never answered. So she hasn't answered my last 2 or 3 emails. She knows this is important to us. I just wrote her and she didn't write me back. And she posted instead something on her channel. So on her video feed, I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. So I asked her, how can you retroactively declare the month of the Aviv on the 10th of the month? Okay, what sense does that make? How can you do that? So she responded on YouTube, on her video feed, by asking, how is your health? So anyway, I suppose I probably should have handled that better, but I really didn't appreciate the insult. So I did take her to task. It's how can you cut off the people's timing? You're already aware of this. In any case, she accused me of harassing her. She says she deleted our questions, that she would block us. We have been blocked. And she would do what she could to make sure that we could not see any of her posts. So this is just, shock for us. We helped her get set up. We've tried to support her. We've tried to encourage her. We bought her equipment. We've done. So in any case, just to keep things short, we canceled financial support. We would like to ask prayers for her. She's obviously a sister who loves Yahweh. She obviously loves her Bible. She loves learning and teaching about the calendar in the land of Israel. We don't know anyone else who is even close to her in terms of knowledge and teaching what the Aviv barley calendar is really about. She's been tremendously helpful to us. We pray that she succeeds. We just need to let people know why we are going to continue to recommend her as the only viable barley witness in the land of Israel today, but why it's not right for her to step into a high priestess function like she's doing, because she's effectively causing chaos, is what she's doing, to speak the truth in love. So, it doesn't make sense. Well, let's just leave it, but we are asking for everyone's prayers for her and for everyone in our movement, because we have a lot of people who say they have Yeshua's spirit, but they're not walking in all of the truth. And we have, in particular, several groups, we have very idolatrous groups in the Hebrew Roots movement, at least from what I have seen. When I first came in, we had a sacred name idolatry. So it's like, well, I can behave like the devil, but as long as I'm using Yahweh's name, then I'm going to heaven and you're going to hell. And then we had, Sabbath and feast terrorists. As long as I'm keeping the Sabbath and feast, I'm doing everything perfect and you can't say anything to me. And then we have, the house church movement is a big one in the Messianic movement. You're just sitting around in someone else's home. We're not really doing anything to bring the Great Commission together the way Yeshua says. So we have a lot of groups that they will vaunt this or vaunt that, or, we speak Hebrew, or we keep the bar. It says, we know when the barley calendar starts. So therefore that's it. We're good. We're done. We don't have to do the whole thing. We don't have to do everything. We have a lot of people like that in our movement. And I don't know what to do for people. If people, we can preach what Scripture says to do. If people don't want to do that, and we already know that 90% of Ephraim isn't going to listen, and 90% of Ephraim is going to die, and probably more on Judah's side. So it's tremendously sad. We need to keep praying for people and keep moving forward. That's all we can really do, is preach the truth and preach what the word says. And if people choose to resist the truth, if people choose to build their house on the sand, so to speak, then there's really nothing we can do. So again, please pray with me for this sister and for everyone in our movement, because all of us can always do a much better job of submitting to Yahweh's spirit. And the proof of that is we end up doing the things Yeshua says to do. Because if we have Yeshua's spirit, then we're going to do all of the things Yeshua's spirit says to do, that Yeshua's word says to do. And that's not just the names. It's not just Sabbath and feasts. It's not just the barley. Okay, there's a whole list of things, and we need to be doing all of those things together. Okay, so let's move on. Now, unlike the Kabbalistic rabbi at the end of the Torah section, we are not in contact with watchers, Nephilim, or demons, so we don't really know what they look like. Just a quick notice as we go through, for those who are new to the Parashat series, there's two passages we're going to come back to again and again throughout the Parashat series, and they have to deal with the two houses of Israel, Judah and Joseph. So, for example, in Breisheet, or Genesis 35 and verse 10, Yaakov's name is changed to Israel, and then Elohim said to him, that a nation, meaning Judah, and a company of Protestant, Christian, Josephite nations would come from Israel, and kings would come from his body. And we'll touch on this all throughout the series, what that means. And we're also going to touch on Ezekiel 37, verses 16 and 17, which tell us that in these end times, while the two houses were split up into a great nation and a company of nations, in the end times they shall be brought back together as one. First, the house of Judah would take a stick for itself, and then now we come to the part it's time for the house of Joseph to do what's needful, to take organization and discipline on himself, to form the stick of Ephraim, and to do all of the many things that are required to be Israel, to be Elohim's people, Israel. So let's come now to the Torah portion itself. Let's dive right in. We're going to cover a few admin issues as we go along, but we're going to build toward the Nephilim, and these other points we'll touch on later. So one of the first things we need to see here, and we've had people get very upset and unsubscribe because of this, but we can't help it. The Hebrew says what it says. So in the very first sentence, so Bereshit or Genesis 1 and verse 1, in English, most versions will say in the beginning, and people make very literal interpretation efforts off of that. However, just to be aware, what it says is in a beginning. So it doesn't say Behareshit, it says Bereshit. So there's two different, so in a beginning. And it's necessary to mention that when we talk about the book of Enoch, is because the book of Enoch is a very different view than what most of us were raised with as the Bible. So let's continue on in Scripture. So we come to verse 2. It says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters. And I know every time I read this, I want to relate this to what I was taught in school about the universe and the solar system and how everything's were put together. But what we find when we study the ancient Hebrew mindset is that they had a completely different idea. They had a completely different conception of the way the universe looked. So don't be upset with yourself if you're trying to match what you were taught in school to what's there in Scripture. But we're going to point out some very important things, and we just need to understand that they had a different model of what the universe looked like. If we were to explain to them what we believe the universe looks like, it wouldn't match up with their theology. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia. It's an early Hebrew conception of the universe. And let's just go through here, and we'll see all the various parts and components. So Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. Now it's worth mentioning this is a spiritual light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good, and Elohim divided the light from the darkness. Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Verse 6, then Elohim said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Thus Elohim made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And I know I'm always trying to figure out, does that relate to the sky or to outer space, or how does that work? Well, if we take a look at the ancient or early Hebrew concept of the universe, again, we see something quite different. So you have the waters which are below the firmament, are the waters in the lower half of the sphere, and the waters which are above the firmament are the waters in the upper half of the sphere. It's the upper seas, or the waters above the firmament. And then you can sort of imagine Elohim's throne room there in heaven with the chambers in heaven. And as you see, you've got windows or portals in the firmament, which are the windows of heaven through which rain and other things can come. Now, notice some very important things. The sun, the moon, and the stars are on the inside of this firmament. So if you were to extend this firmament, or you try to apply this to a modern concept of geography or cosmology, you would put the firmament effectively at the edge of the universe because the stars are on the inside of the firmament. So that leads other people to comment that this is more of a conceptual model because there's a firmament outside the ends of all the stars and everything that exists. And there's many different takes on this, but you get the idea. But it's worth pointing out and worth noticing that the sun, the moon, and the stars are on the inside of the firmament. So, and also, since these things moved, it was considered that they had relationship in the divine realms. They were thought to be living beings. Verse 8, notice Elohim called the firmament heaven. So the firmament is now called heaven. Then Elohim said, let the waters under the heavens or under the firmament inside the rakia be gathered together into one place and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So here we're talking about inside the firmament, inside the rakia, you're going to have a differentiation between the land and the water. Okay, now this is a famous model of what it would look like if you were to follow this. This is the Orlando Ferguson flat earth model of 1893. And there's several different models, several different ways to put this together. What this brother did is he took all of the verses pertaining to the cosmic geography and he put them all together in a form that obviously made sense to him. Notice he's got a place for all the waters to be gathered together and a place for the dry land to appear. There's different ways to look at this, but one question is that really even the way we're supposed to be doing this? Are we supposed to be concerned? Is Elohim concerning himself with the physical cosmic geography, or is Elohim perhaps concerning himself with the spiritual cosmic geography? And what I mean by that, this is a short study we wrote. I can't remember which one of the Nazarene Scripture Studies volumes it's in, but you can search for it. Basically, if you just take a map of the world like they use and roll it out like they do, and place the land of Israel on the eastern tip of the Mediterranean Sea, then effectively you have Israel in the center of the world, which it certainly is. And then you have all the lands to which the house of Joseph or Ephraim has been scattered, effectively as the farthest reaches away from the land of Israel. Now, obviously, we have Josephites and Ephraimites in every country, but it seems like a lot of the concentrations are at a distance from the land of Israel. So that's why we talk about a spiritually flat earth. The earth might be round in the physical, but we're talking about the Hebrew culture, that which crosses over from the physical to the spiritual. It's a different thing. Now, we bring this up in the context of the book of Enoch and the Watchers, just because we also need to be aware of the idea that perhaps we aren't supposed to be taking things as literally as we think. For example, when I was a child, I was taught that this is what atoms look like. So you have a nucleus there, and then you have electrons that are spinning, and they're very neat and orderly. Well, come to find out later in life, electrons they don't look anything like that. So this is more what a helium atom electron cloud actually looks like. This is just a very, very simple helium atom. You've got 2 protons, 2 electrons, and 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and then you've got an electron cloud, and it can be anywhere in that cloud with different varying degrees of probability. And this is just a very simple atom. When you start talking complex atoms and then even molecules, you start to end up with some very interesting patterns of how these things couple and connect. Is too much to explain to a child. And do you really need to explain all those things to a child when they're 5 or 6 years old? Or can it perhaps wait? So these are questions that we start to get into in Enoch. And people say, well, how can that be? It's like, well, does Yahweh really need to give us a full study in cosmic geography before he helps us to understand where we need to be focusing spiritually or putting our moral behaviors at? So there are other places and other times in life where someone asks you a question, like say a child asks you, where do babies come from? It's not necessarily age appropriate to give them all of the details. So this is just a thought. We'll talk about this in more detail as we go on. But it's also interesting when we talk about cosmic geography. This is from Wikipedia again. So this is a Babylonian map of the world from around 600 BCE. So the house of Joseph or the house of Ephraim would already be in the Assyrian dispersion at this time. House of Judah is just getting ready to go into the Babylonian exile. And it says in this Babylonian map of the world, it looked very similar to the Old Testament concept, which is where you have a flat circular earth ringed by a world ocean. And then on the far side of the world ocean, then you have mountains and the end of the earth. So there are a lot of things shared, and we're going to talk about the reasons for that next week when we get into Parashat Noah. We talk about the Tower of Babylon. But notice the correspondences here. So notice this is what the Orlando Ferguson flat earth model has come up with, is the same kind of a thing, is you have a central land mass surrounded by a body of water, and then you have mountains on the end. And that's what Scripture speaks of. The question is, are we to interpret that literally, or are we to interpret that spiritually or figuratively or poetically? Okay, well, this question will get more important as we get farther and farther into Enoch. So we're continuing on in verse 10. And Elohim called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of waters he called seas. So again, we're inside the rakia, inside the firmament, and Elohim saw that it was good. So again, we're talking inside the firmament. Now, we can see a lot of this, whether it's poetic language or spiritual language. It also shows up in other books, such as Job, chapter 38, we'll start here in verse 4. He says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" Okay, well, this is Elohim speaking. So if he's talking about the literal foundations of the earth, then we should look for literal foundations. But is he talking about literal foundations, or is he talking about spiritual foundations of the earth? Okay. And so who determined its measurements, and to what were its foundations fastened, or who laid its cornerstone? Now, I wish we had time to do more with this verse 7. It says, "When the morning stars sang together, and all of the sons of Elohim shouted for joy." Now, that's a parallelism. So the morning stars are being equated with the sons of Elohim, because on the inside of the firmament, well, we'll talk about the throne geography in just a bit. So we'll talk about that just coming up. Let's notice a few more things on our way toward the Nephilim. So verse 11, Elohim commanded the beings to bring forth according to their kind, whose seed is in itself. And that pertains both to plant matter and also to animals. So in verse 12, "And so Elohim, the earth did bring forth grass, the herb that yields a seed according to itself, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind." And this same rule applies to humans. It applies to Nephilim. It applies to everyone. Verse 14, "Then Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years." And people are forever contacting us, trying to tell us that this means we have to obey the equinox or sometimes the lunar Sabbath models. So if you'd like to know why that verse has nothing to do with the equinox, please check our video study, "Where is the equinox commanded?" You can also check, "Where is spring commanded?" But so what we're looking here, we're getting a better idea of how the Israelites took a view of their world. And once again, let's remember that the sun, the moon, and the stars are the inside of the firmament. So you have Elohim up there in the high heavens with his throne chamber. Then you have a second level of governance ruling over the earth down, the sun, the moon, and the stars, which were considered created living beings. And then you could have a third level, which could be celestial, but could also be rulers that were placed here on earth. So, for example, when King David was established as an anointed king, it was considered that he was Yahweh's representative here on earth. So 3 levels, and it's not my area of specialty, but there's 3 levels of divine governance there. Verse 16, and Elohim made 2 great lights, the greater light, the sun, to rule the day, and the lesser light, the moon, to rule the night. He made the stars also. Elohim set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. So that's when the sun, the moon, and the stars were created, is on the 4th day. And you always end up with these lunar Sabbath people that they want to assume that the sun or that the moon was created on the 1st day. It's created on the 4th day. So moving forward, verse 27, we see that Elohim created man in his image. That's so important. So he created us male and female, and then he said to us to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Now we are to have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth, which means we can farm it. It won't collapse. It won't be destroyed. Elohim is in charge. Okay. At the same time, we'll see later that we are also commanded to tend and keep his earth and to maintain it like a garden. Genesis 2 and verse 2, it was the 7th day that Elohim ended his work which he had done and rested on the 7th day, and he set it apart because he rested. So that's why we do that. Verse 8, now Elohim planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground Yahweh Elohim made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden. That's the tree of hearing and obeying. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the tree of justifying doing what you think instead of doing what you heard Elohim say. Verse 15, then Yahweh Elohim took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and keep it. And that's what we are supposed to be doing. If we had stayed in the garden, we would be tending and keeping his garden. And Yahweh Elohim commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of thinking you know better, that you don't have to do what you hear, you shall not eat. For in the day that you start thinking you don't have to obey what you're hearing, you shall surely die. And this is what everyone forgets. So we've got this. It's as if a seed has been planted, as if we were dropped down from the heavens. We had the potential to behave the correct way, but we didn't want to do it. We didn't want to make the effort, or we weren't ready, or whatever the excuse is. Now we have to raise ourselves back up, step by step, climbing Jacob's ladder. And going about it this way, there's war. So we talk more about that in the series as we progress. But this is effectively what we're doing, is we're attempting to reestablish the lost and severed relationship with Elohim by establishing the conditions of the garden here on earth. Sadly, to get there, there's war. That's why the house of Judah is ultimately in charge. We talk about that throughout the video series. Now, problem starts to come in Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to talk all about these details because it's going to have an impact on what we do. So verse 1, now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which Yahweh Elohim had made. And he said to the woman, has Elohim indeed said you have to hear and obey his voice? It's like it almost doesn't matter what else he's going to say. Has Elohim indeed said, getting us to question that we're supposed to do what we hear, because that's the whole relationship. Elohim speaks, we hear, we do. Here we have Satan getting us to question that right from the very beginning. And most of us are still lost there, quite frankly. So we look this word up because that's what we love to do, is Nahash. It's Strong's Concordance 5175. It's from 5172. It means a snake from its hiss, because Hebrew is an action-oriented language. So yes, it's a snake, but what it is it's a hisser. So it's a serpent. Well, we keep looking this up. Come to Brown Driver Briggs, because this is a very important definition. And they also have the definition of a mythological fleeing serpent. So what we need to see is it can be a literal serpent or it can be a mythological fleeing serpent. So now we're going to look up the root words, because that's what we love to do. So we come to Strong's Hebrew 5172, Nahash. It's a primitive root. It means properly to hiss. Okay. In other words, to whisper a magic spell, or generally to prognosticate, which is to foretell or predict the future. It is to be a diviner, or it is to be an enchanter. So notice, this isn't a snake like we think about with sticking the tongue in and out and hiss, hiss, hiss. That's not this snake at all. This snake is a prognosticator, a diviner, or an enchanter. That's a very different view. So let's check this out. Let's make sure that's actually what it means. So we come here to the Brown Driver Briggs definition, and it gives us something very similar. It's to practice divination. To be a snake, to hiss, is to divine or to observe signs, to practice fortune telling or divination, or to observe the signs and omens and to give prognostication. So this is a very different view of what it is to be a snake or to be a serpent or to hiss. And notice here we have also in Bereshit or Genesis chapter 44 and verse 15, Yosef said to them, to his brothers, in the incident of his missing cup, "What deed is this that you have done? Did you not know that such a man as myself can certainly practice divination?" So did you not know that a man such as myself can hiss? Did you not know that I prognosticate? That I practice all of the arts of Egypt? Did you not know that? Okay, so Joseph, he's not a serpent, he's not a snake, but yet he's practicing divination, so he fulfills it in a functional sense. So when we're reading scripture, we have to be careful to differentiate between what is literal and what is speaking of things and events in the spiritual realm. Now we come to Genesis 3 and verse 1. Now the serpent, the hisser, the prognosticator, the diviner, the enchanter, does it necessarily does it look exactly like a serpent at this point? Or is it possible that it didn't look like a serpent? He said, now the serpent was more, just as Joseph didn't look like what we think of as a serpent. It says, now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field, which Yahweh Elohim had made. And the diviner, the enchanter, said to the woman, has Elohim indeed said, you need to do what he said? Has Elohim indeed said, you need to hear and obey his voice? So it's like, no matter what Satan says here, it's like Elohim gave you commandments. Did Elohim indeed give you a commandment? You can't do your own thing? You can't decide, I'm not going to obey him. I'm going to follow my own thoughts and feelings and emotions instead. I'm going to do what seems good and right in my own eyes instead of reading and obeying or hearing and obeying. It's like, no matter what Satan says, he's trying to break down that trust relationship, that the very best thing is if we just hear Yahweh and obey him, then he will bless us most and best, because that's what he likes to do. Verse 4, then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die for disobeying his voice. For Elohim knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will become like him, knowing good and evil. So in other words, you'll be able to make up your own mind as to what you get to do and not do. So you don't have to obey all of Elohim's word. You can make up your own mind. You can pick and choose. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. So she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. So obviously, that was not what Elohim wanted. We disobeyed his voice. So Yahweh Elohim said to the serpent, verse 14, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. Now, this begs the question, was the snake on his belly first? Now, when Joseph can appear as a serpent, or Joseph can appear as a hisser or a diviner, what was the real form of this serpent? What was the real form of this hisser? And did it originally go on its belly? Or is it that after this transgression, then it would go on its belly? That's the question. Verse 15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So, chapter 4, verse 1, Adam knew Hava his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, the older, and said, I have acquired a man from Yahweh. Then she bore again, this time his brother Hevel, the younger. Now Hevel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to Yahweh. Nothing special. He just brought an offering. But Hevel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. He brought the first and finest. And Yahweh respected Hevel and his first and finest offering, but he did not respect Cain and his meh, so-so, lukewarm offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So Yahweh said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. You need to be rule and master over your own spirit. Verse 8, now Cain talked with Hevel his brother, and it came to pass that when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Hevel his younger brother and killed him. Then Yahweh said to Cain, where is Hevel your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my master's keeper? And we're going to see again and again throughout this Parashat series that the answer to that question is a resounding yes. We are supposed to serve as our brother's keepers. Sadly, there's a very difficult pathway to walk. Since we didn't want to do it the right way, now the path leads through war. But that's just what it is. We still have to establish the conditions of Eden here on this earth. We talk about that more in this video series and in upcoming documentaries. So Genesis 5 and verse 18, we're starting to get ready to meet the watchers. So Yared lived 162 years and begot Enoch. Verse 21, Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. And after he got Methuselah, Enoch walked with Elohim 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with Elohim, and he was not, for Elohim took him. So people talk about the rapture, and in Greek, it's called the harpazo, and then here in Hebrew, it's just kach. So it just took. Elohim just took him. So what we're speaking of here is Elohim effectively translated him from the material to the spiritual realms. Elohim took him, and he crossed over at that time. So verse 29, Noach is born, and he called his name Noach, saying, this one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which Yahweh has cursed. And we're going to learn more about that next week as we progress forward. verse 32. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we're going to talk more about those three sons next week. So now we come to chapter 6 and verse 1, and we're going to start to dig into the Nephilim, and we're going to segue then to the rabbis. So verse 1, now it came to pass when the men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Now, the book of 1 Enoch speaks about this in more detail, but let's look up first this word, sons of God. It's the sons of Elohim. So we look it up. It's Strong's Concordance, Hebrew 430. It's the plural of 433. It's Elohim. It means gods in the ordinary sense, but specifically when it's in the plural like that, it's speaking about the Elohim, Yahweh Elohim. Now, something important to notice, we're going to talk about this a lot. We need to notice this. It's occasionally applied by way of deference to magistrates and sometimes also as a superlative regarding angels, great ones, great people, judges, mighty men. So now remember we talked about our three levels of cosmic hierarchy. You've got Yahweh in the highest heavens, then the sons of Elohim, because they would use family members to flesh out the cabinet. Then they'd have other ministers that they would bring on to serve them. And that's how they would rule. So this term Elohim, now notice, because there's going to be multiple dimensions to this, but this term Elohim refers primarily to Elohim, but also can refer to these magistrates, great men, judges, and mighty men who might serve as the third tier in a cosmic authority structure. Now we need to notice something else very important here in verse 3. Yahweh doesn't just get upset with the fallen sons of Elohim. He doesn't get upset just with the fallen watchers, but rather he also gets upset with men for doing the wrong thing, for not guarding our gates, so to speak. And Yahweh said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So we didn't guard our gates against someone coming from an improper domain, and now our lifespans get limited to 120 years. Verse 4, it says, now there were giants on the earth in those days. So the sons of Elohim came in to human women, and now we have giants on the earth in those days. So the offspring from this illicit union were giants. And we'll see they be physical giants. They can also be societal or spiritual giants, so to speak. But there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So we have two factors. We have a spiritual giantism and a physical giantism going on. Okay, so we look up this word here. It's Strong's Hebrew 5303, Nephil. So it's from 5307. Now it means properly, it means a feller in the old sense of the term. So that is a bully or a tyrant, and it's also translated as a giant. So what we're looking at is someone who's big and powerful in the physical realm. That's what we're looking for here in this specific application. Okay, so let's look up the root, because we like to do that. 5307, it's a primitive root meaning to fall, and in a great variety of applications. Now, this is the disputed scholarship. People write books on this. There's a lot of research in this area, and it's amazing how much difference one vowel point can make. But look at the ways that this word nafal is translated. To fall, spiritually or physically, or to cast yourself down. So Satan was trying to convince Yeshua to cast himself down, or to fall away from the truth, or to fall down. So these are the associations. Verse 5, then Yahweh saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And this is the problem. He made us to be a family taking care of each other, and those are the ones that he wants to keep. And Yahweh was sorry he'd made everyone else. He was grieved in his heart. Verse 7, so Yahweh said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, for I am sorry I have made them. And yet Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. And we'll talk about Noah next week. Now, let's make sure we've covered verse 4 here, just because we need to see this dual aspect. Notice it says, there were giants on the earth in those days, talking about physical giants, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So now notice we've got the physical giant aspect in the first line, and then in the last line, we're talking about what you might call reputational giantism. We're talking about men who are living larger than life. These are men of a big name. They're men of renown. So that's what we're talking about. Could be talking about the lowest level of the cosmic administration. So those are the possibilities. Now, people say, well, what is this Book of the Watchers and where does it come from? And when you start to get into the Book of the Watchers, there's so many interpretations and there's so many ideas, and it really is a different kind of a book. It reads very differently. So, for example, the way the prophecies read in, for example, Ezekiel or Zechariah or Daniel, or the way the book of Revelation reads, it reads similarly as a vision, and a very, very different vision. They say, well, where does it come from? Well, the book purports to be at least a descendant of a manuscript written by Enoch, the seventh from Adam. And there's a very good, very interesting paper written by a scholar called Amar Anus. It's called On the Origin of Watchers, a comparative study of the antediluvian, pre-flood wisdom in Mesopotamian and Jewish traditions. It's very thick. We'll take it slow. We're going to go through the abstract here, or the summary. Some very important things here. What he's effectively arguing is that it is a cultural appropriation from Babylon of an incorrect history that was then corrected in order to tell the story right. So here it starts out, it says, in the article, it is argued that the origin of the Watchers derives from the Mesopotamian mythology of the antediluvian sages, or what's called the Apkallus. So he's saying the origin of the Watchers derives effectively from the incident of Babylon, and the mystery Babylonian religions that arise from them. And we're going to see the involvement by what's called these antediluvian sages, or Apkallus, which is what the Babylonians worshipped rather than Yahweh. So it says, more precisely, it is proposed that the mythology of the Watchers and their sons, the giants, derived from inverted versions of various Mesopotamian myths and beliefs about Apkallus. So in other words, the Babylonians had everything all wrong. They had wrong myths and wrong Mesopotamian beliefs. And so they took these inverted truths, straightened them out, and then that's where you come up with the Book of Enoch. So there's a lot of support for that view. Now, people say, what are the Apkallus? All right, so we just come to Wikipedia and type in Apkallus. You can read all about them there. So you've got a chaos monster on the left, and then you've got an Apkallu sun god on the right. And the Apkallus, typically they're anthropomorphic, which means they have both human and animal characteristics. Typically speaking, it'll be human mixed with fish or human mixed with bird for the Apkallus. And then here we have some more pictures of Apkallus. You got On the left, you've got Nineveh. You've got a fish god similar to Dagon. And then on the right, you've got a Nimrod. You've got an eagle-headed god on the right. And as you can see, they both have what you might call a bag of tricks in their left hand. People speculate on what's the meaning of that bag of tricks, etc. Now, you also have more Apkallus. So here's two throne guardian or two guardian Apkallus with wings, and they don't have the bag of tricks this time, but they have, I'm not sure whether that's pomegranates or what that is. But those are the Apkallus, and those are effectively whom the ancient Babylonians, the ancient Mesopotamians worshipped rather than Yahweh. So if you can just think about how different the world would be if you worshipped a half man, half fish, or a half man, half bird, that's a very different lifestyle. He continues, he says, on some layers of Mesopotamian, Babylonian mythology and ritual practices, the sages were already regarded by the Mesopotamians themselves, by the Babylonians, as dangerous and potentially malicious creatures upon which the Jewish authors could then build their parody or their take or their cultural appropriation. It says, among other associations, the Apkallus, the sages, had strong ties to Mesopotamian demonology, and they were occasionally counted by the Mesopotamians themselves as being evil beings capable of witchcraft. And if they were in fact related to the Watchers, then that's because they are evil beings capable of witchcraft. He continues, he says, this shows that the wickedness of the antediluvian teachers of humankind, the Apkallus, the Mesopotamian gods, figures, in Jewish sources was not wholly an inversion of the Mesopotamian traditions by Jewish scholars, but rather was partly taken from already existing trends in Mesopotamian demonology. You say, what does that mean? And what it means is that the Mesopotamians themselves didn't write these glowing reports about how great and perfect and pure the Apkallus were. So we sing praises to Yahweh because he's good. The Mesopotamians didn't sing praises to the Apkallus. So they had a reputation for being evil. So, what is that all about? Well, again, if they were the fallen watchers as described by the book of 1 Enoch, then they would be malicious, evil beings. And next week, we're going to talk about Parashat Noach. We're going to see how the Babylon mystery religions tie in with this. We're going to see what is the original source of Mystery Babylon that has tainted the church and, quite frankly, the other two measures of meal as well. But can we see the parallel here between physical giants and between societal or reputational giants? And we're going to see this again and again as we move forward. And a lot of people have really strong objections to the concept of fallen angels, so to speak, crossing into the material realm and giving birth to human children. It doesn't make sense. It boggles the mind. And then when people suggest, well, the word Elohim can be a reference to human magistrates, it provides an escape route or a way out to get away from grappling with what is Scripture actually telling us here? What's it actually saying to do here? But if we find that offensive, then what do we do with the concept of Elohim manifesting here in this realm? So Luke chapter 1 and verse 30 says, then the messenger said to Miriam, do not be afraid, Miriam, for you have found favor with Elohim. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, meaning a son of Elohim, and shall call his name Yeshua. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. Again, a son of Elohim. And Yahweh Elohim will give him the throne of his father David. Verse 33, and he will reign over the house of Yaakov forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Then Miriam said to the messenger, how can this be, since I don't know a man? Verse 35, and the messenger answered and said to her, the set-apart spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore also that set-apart one who is to be born will be called the Son of Elohim. So now, just to point out here, we have a union between a spiritual being and a human mother. Okay, so the question is, and people say, well, but this is Yahweh that we're talking about. Of course, Yahweh can do that. Yahweh is Elohim. Of course, he can do that. So if Yahweh is Elohim and Yahweh Elohim has the power to do this, is it possible that the sons of Elohim, who are also effectively created gods, is it possible that they could have the power to do these kinds of things? Now, sometimes people will also quote Yeshua in Matthew or Matthew chapter 22 and verse 30, where Yeshua says that in the resurrection, those who are resurrected neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the messengers of Elohim in heaven, who don't marry. So people say, well, you see, they can't marry. This doesn't say that they can't, it says that they don't. So what this shows is that those messengers who keep to their proper estate in the spiritual realm, there's no need to marry and reproduce because that's the spiritual realm. So, but what we're talking about here and what the book of 1 Enoch, the book of the Watchers, describes is that there were messengers who left their proper estate and crossed over into this realm, much like Elohim's spirit crossed over into this realm, except Yahweh's set-apart spirit had that authority, whereas the fallen watchers, the fallen sons of Elohim, did not have that authority. So that would be the difference between these verses. Well, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 10, Shaliach Shaul, or the Apostle Paul, seems to have believed that it was a possibility that it could in fact happen again. And he says, for this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the messengers. And this is so important right here. And as we progress through this teaching and as we see who the watchers are, how they operate, how demons operate, what we're going to see is it's very, very important to send out your signals, both in the physical and in the spiritual realms, of where your true loyalties lie. Because as we'll see, these other entities are looking to see, are we being faithful or can we be tripped up? And so when we do what we're supposed to do, this sends a symbol, this sends a message to the spiritual realm. So can't remember what I was going to do. Oh, here we go. That's what we're talking about. I think we talked about this briefly before, but again, can we see the levels of kingdom hierarchy? Can we see Elohim up there in the chambers in heaven? And then can we see his ministers, the sons of Elohim, being the sun, the moon, and the stars, operating inside the firmament? And then can we imagine a human level of magistrates, or there can be another supernatural level of magistrates, however Elohim so desires. But this is the early conception, how that plays out. So if you can see the different levels of hierarchy, we're going to see that continue as we go on as well. Okay, so here we have very simplified summary. In the ancient Near East, a king, and Yahweh is the king above all kings, he'd put his sons and family members in charge of the government. That's how you do it. That's how you'd maintain loyalty. So the sons of Elohim are, in Scripture, they are Yahweh's divinely created sons. And that's why we have the quotation in the Psalms and in other places. So they form, or formed, if you're talking past tense about the fallen watchers, they form or formed a heavenly ruling council over us. And again, you'd have the lower level officials who would report to the councils. Now, we don't have time to get into the book of 1 Enoch here, but 1 Enoch tells us that most of Elohim's sons are still set apart. Most of them did not fall. However, about 200 of Yahweh's sons rebelled. So there are 200, most people would call them fallen angels, but they're fallen watchers. And what that means is they left the spiritual domain, they left their rightful realm, and they came here into the physical realm to take human wives. We can see it both in terms of a physical manifestation, and it's also possible to see it in terms of spiritual possession. So there's a lot of correspondence to the things that we see in the physical world. That's why people get so excited about 1 Enoch. Now, the 200 fallen sons of Elohim, they took human wives, and then the children were giants, and they were called the Nephilim, and there were other giant clans. Now, here's the thing. Since the sons of Elohim should never have crossed into the physical domain to take human wives, there should never have been giant clans. And since the giant clans have no rightful place, since they have no rightful estate in this world, when the giants die, their souls, they can't go back to the other realm because they were never supposed to come here. So what happens is that their souls become disembodied demons. And that's where demons come from. So the sons of Elohim cohabited with human women, the giants died, and now you have a disembodied demon that wants very much to re-inhabit a body. And that is why the demons go around seeking willing human hosts. And they can and will try to trip you up. Wherever you are weak, they will try to trip you up. They will try to plant seeds of doubt, just like the hisser in the garden, trying to get you to give up or abandon Elohim's commandments. So, as we will see in other studies, part of Israel's mission in conquering the land of Israel was to wipe out the giant clans, specifically east of the Jordan. So the giant clans that are mentioned, we're talking the Anakim, the Amorites, the Emites, and the Rephaim, who are also called the Zuzim or the Zamzumim, and the Nephilim. Those are all giant clans. And again, Shaliach Shaul seems to have believed that it was possible for this kind of a thing to happen again. And that's what we're going to see in the portion with the Kabbalistic rabbi, is that these non-human sentient beings want nothing more than to gain our loyalty to them. They want to turn us away from Yahweh and be loyal to them. And they want re-embodiment. And they're serious about it. So just again, to make the point, the giantism that's mentioned can mention either as literal physical giantism, or you could call it societal giantism or reputational giantism. And the problem is not that they're giants. The problem is that they don't use their giant abilities to build Yeshua's kingdom. And so they end up using their capabilities to build their own kingdoms. Now, this dual aspect is even mentioned in Wikipedia. In the article entry under Nephilim, it says that the Nephilim are mysterious beings or humans, dual aspect, in the Bible, traditionally imagined as being of great size and strength, physical giantism, or alternately, they can be beings of great power and authority. So, power giants, so to speak, authoritative giants, giants among men. So we have been talking about physical and reputational giants. And this is a slide we borrowed from Parashat Balak. We might take a look at a reputational giant. So Yuval Harari, not a particularly large man. This is his doctoral dissertation for his PhD entitled Ancient Jewish Magic. So he makes comments that the Ben Ish Chai are echoed by scholars of Babylonian Jewry who observed the prevalence of magical and esoteric beliefs among Jews of Babylon, dating back to Talmudic times, as discussed above. It continues, Jacob Neusner claims, were an anthropologist of our times to spend a few years in ancient Pumbedita, Sura, or Nehardea, which were the ancient centers of Talmudic learning, in order to learn the social role of the sage, his research work would certainly have had a title like The Legislating Sorcerer of Babylon. So do we remember we talked about the definition of a snake or a serpent, someone who hisses, someone who prognosticates? Okay, well, we talk about great men, men of great reputation. Here's the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who headed the Chabad. And once again, we know that the Chabad is descended from Frankism, which is based upon a corruption of Yahweh's word. So this is kind of how it works. If you depart from Yahweh's word, the more you hand yourself over to Satan, the more these kinds of blessings are given to you. The more you depart from Yahweh's word, the more you try to create your own religion, so to speak, by borrowing from the occult, the more benefits and blessings you can get from the occult, at least temporarily. So we also talked about Chabad and the 4 child-sized mattresses that were stained with blood, and we spoke about that. There's a URL for those who are interested. Then on BitChute, they admitted that the 4 child-sized, blood-stained mattresses were stained with blood because they were doing rituals regarding to resuscitating the dead. So this is the book that they were working with, and we've spoken in multiple of the Parashiot, how Judah just really has no problem whatsoever with syncretism, because Judah seems to believe that Judah has this, that because Judah has the kingship and because Judah has the Levitical priestly blessings, that they get to ignore Yahweh's commandments in the written Torah of Moshe and syncretize and pick and choose and pretty much do what they want. And they figured that they can clean up occultism, such as Buddhism, such as the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. They figured, no problem, we're Judah. We can do that. Yahweh says no, but we say yes, so we can do that. We don't read the Tanakh anyway. We read the Talmud. So they figured they can do that. Well, this is a big problem for Judah because syncretism is prohibited. Yahweh doesn't approve of it. Well, Chabad.org, syncretism is all over the place. What I didn't find in a Tibetan monastery, I found at Chabad, and Chabad is proud of it. So another book just came up this week. I haven't had time to investigate it, but I just thought I'd notify people. It says 2 Ways of Light, Kabbalah and Vedanta. And so Vedanta, I never studied into it. I recognize that vaguely as a branch of Hindu. So it says there's a unique relationship that exists between the Jewish mystical teachings of Kabbalah and the highest spiritual philosophy of the Hindus, the Vedanta. And the connection is they both come from Ur of the Chaldees ultimately. They're both Babylonian in nature. They both come from ancient Mesopotamia. And once again, we'll talk about that next week. So we don't know what the fallen watchers look like. We don't know what the Nephilim look like. And we don't know what demons look like. And particularly, they can take on more than one aspect. So, but again, unlike the Kabbalistic rabbi that we will be watching shortly, we did not consult with any watchers, any Nephilim, or any demons. So we already covered this. We already talked about how there's a dual aspect, both physical and societal or reputational giantism. So with that, let's take a look at our brothers who are in the head of the statue of Babylon. They're in the head of gold, the great men of our day. Okay, now we're going to one thing, just want to talk about this earlier. One book that I do definitely recommend if you want to learn more about the book of Enoch or the book of the Watchers. There's a companion to the book of Enoch by Dr. Michael Heiser. He's got a large number of works regarding the Watchers. Again, he's a Trinitarian, so take his research and be very skeptical of his conclusions. So most of his conclusions are red horse, but the research is outstanding. One of the things that Dr. Heiser comments on, maybe not in this particular book, but in his lectures and perhaps in his other books, is that you have the fallen watchers, and they appear, basically, they get renamed as Babylonian, Greek, and Roman gods. So that is exactly the function of how the Babylon mystery religions work. So they were established there at Babylon, or even perhaps they were established when the Watchers fell, and the Watchers have no problems changing their names or going undercover or making slight modifications here and there, just so long as they can get the ultimate worship and take the worship away from Yahweh and get that attention and energy refocused on them. We'll also, again, tie it next week to Come Out of Her, My People by Dr. C.J. Coster, and he just talks about the Babylon mystery religions being the core of the Roman Church, and we're going to point out also how the Babylon mystery religions are also effectively the core of Orthodox Judaism and also of Islam. So we've already spoken about this. We have this diagram in our study on Revelation and the end times, both on video and in print. And effectively, you have Nebuchadnezzar's statue, his dream statue. So Babylon, once again, the Tower of Babylon, the Babylon mystery religions. So those are all right there in the head. And right now we have rabbinic Judah is occupying the head. I mean, physically, Babylon was his ancient study centers of worship. You have your Babylonian Kabbalah, you have the Babylonian oracles, you have all these things from Babylon. We discussed that in more detail in the Revelation study. So now we are ready to meet our Kabbalistic Rabbi of the Week, so to speak. This is Rabbi Ariel Bar Tzadok of the Kosher Torah School of Rabbi Ariel Bar Tzadok. And this is his YouTube video on his YouTube channel, is Extraterrestrials, Disclosure, Biblical Prophecies, and Kabbalistic Revelations. And we're going to see several clips from his video here, and he's going to tell us how the rabbis are actively involved in contacting the fallen watchers and other entities, including demons. So one of the first things that we're going to see is he's going to tell us, now he is a master Kabbalist. He's been on international television as a Kabbalist. So he is telling us that the Kabbalah comes ultimately from Greek Neoplatonic philosophy. And we don't have any issue with that, because when you say Greek, you're effectively saying Babylonian, because they're all part of Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue. The Kabbalah also is an attempted cleanup of the Chaldean oracles. So effectively what we're saying is they both come from around the region of ancient Mesopotamia, in other words, Babylon. And we'll talk more about that next week.
The Kabbalah took a system of understanding which surprisingly had its origins in Greek Neoplatonic philosophy. Yeah, that's really where it comes from. I don't care if you like it or not.
So as we'll see in the Renewed Covenant section, these fallen watchers or angels got in trouble for leaving their correct realm and attempting to enter the human realm. And not only did Yahweh get upset with the fallen watchers, he also got upset with the humans. However, we'll see that Rav Bar Tzadok tells us that there are multiple other dimensions, and that if we will just shift our consciousness, we can become aware of those other dimensions, and we also can interact with them, opposite to what we're supposed to do in Genesis 6 and verse 3.
There are other dimensions. That's the world we call it now. Word we call it dimensions, right? It used to be called olamot. There are multiple dimensions. And if we can shift the way that we are aware and conscious, we can become aware of those other dimensions and interact with them.
Next, Rav Bar Sadok tells us that the Jewish sages have long practiced astral travel, and they have long communicated with the entities in these other interdimensional realms. And he tells us that many rabbis contact these other entities even today. He says this is kind of normal for us.
We have the prophecies of the prophets recorded in the Tanakh. We have the wise predictions and perceptions of our sages, many of whom, of course, did astral travel. And not only did they experience higher consciousness in a parallel dimension, but in astral projection and remote viewing, they went into these other dimensions and communicated with the people there. Rabbi Akiva did this. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi did this. Of course, the biblical prophets and people to this day. We do this all the time. This is for us kind of normal.
Next, Rav Bar Tzadok tells us that we're not dealing so much with extraterrestrials as we are dealing with interdimensionals, although these two concepts and ideas do overlap a lot.
We're not dealing with extraterrestrials. Oh, they're out there all right, big time. We're dealing with interdimensionals. And interdimensionals and extraterrestrials are kind of overlapping.
Now, we don't have time to unpack everything that he says about interdimensional beings, but you can watch his video if you like. But what he tells us next is that the dimension of inner earth is extensively inhabited. And he says all of the demons, all the shadim, and all of the genies, or all the jinn, live there, and along with other beings.
A point that's made very clear about our sages is the reality of presences of the hollow earth, inner earth. Full civilizations are down there. All the shadim and the jinn live down there. Pre-Adamic civilizations.
Now, we don't have time to unpack all the details, but they tell us that the governments of the world, meaning the great men, the men of renown, seek contact with these shadim or these demons to gain the advanced technology that they can offer. Hence, they will have the most advanced weaponry. Hence, they will win in war. Now, what the good rabbi doesn't tell us, but which should start coming clear to us, is that the Kabbalistic rabbis are the link. They are the ones doing these communications.
Tell me something. If you were a government agent and you sought contact with these entities, just like the Nazis did before, and your intent and purpose is to solicit from them technological advancement, the likes of which have been very relevant in the last 50, 60, 70 years, what would you pay for that? Pretty much anything. That's what the governments of our world have done. They made a deal with those non-human intelligent civilizations who religiously we call shadim. And at the time, being they didn't believe in such things, they didn't even know it.
Earlier, we talked about how it is that the sons of Elohim fell spiritually, came down to earth, crossed the dimension, and went to come into human women. So then they had giant children which have no place on this earth. So when these giants died, their spirits would turn into demons. And he tells us next that these shadim, or these demons, have been craving to intermarry with humans for a very long time. So what does that say in light of Genesis 6:3 and 6:4? So he even speaks about, says if you go to Sefaria.org, you go to Kav HaYashar, I went there, I looked it up. It's chapter 69, which speaks of how a Jewish Beit Din adjudicated the inheritance of a man who had married a non-human spirit wife and who had non-human heirs. Let's watch it.
Entities of this nature, according to Rabbi Menachem Tziyuni, that wrote, 700 years ago maybe, they have been craving to intermarry with human beings since the beginning. All kinds of midrashim talk about that. You can even go on to websites like Sefaria, is it Sefaria.org, and pull up the book Kaf HaYashar, and chapters 68, 69, and read about a marriage between a human being and a shed, the likes of which the inheritance of his children were debated between his demonic children and his human children. It had to be adjudicated, and the bet did. And they don't tell the stories of myth. These things are real.
Now, I want to say this appropriately. I don't want to get sued, but what I would like to encourage everyone to do is to listen very, very carefully to what the good rabbi is saying to make sure that all of the statements are consistent and line up, and that there's nothing that's inconsistent and that is the opposite of what it appears to be. So in this 2-minute snippet, the good rabbi tells us that Kabbalistic rabbis communicate telepathically with these non-human, sentient, reptilian entities. He says that they're called by various names, including the Tili and also the Irim, or the Watchers. Well, the problem is, you know that those are fallen watchers, because the non-fallen watchers aren't going to communicate outside of their domain unless they're under orders to do so. So if you have someone who's communicating outside of the proper domain, that's a fallen watcher. Now listen carefully. Rav Tzadok claims that these fallen watchers are the good guys. So the reptilians, the snakes, the ones who fell, the good guys. Okay, let's listen carefully.
We still communicate telepathically with all of these other entities. There was a race of highly evolved reptilians who matured and evolved on Earth and have since ascended. And they presently serve Hashem, God. And they are reptilian entities, maybe evolved dinosaurs, who knows? I don't think the dinosaurs were so 65 million years ago. They were probably a lot closer than that. But aside from that, an evolved reptilian race. They are referred to as, in the Sefer Yetzirah, they're referred to as the Teli, T-E-L-I. I write all about this. You go search this out. Sefer Yetzirah says that they rule in this universe like a king on his throne. They're the reptilians. We know who they are, and they know us. We know them by different names. The book of Daniel calls them the Irin, the watchers. The book of Isaiah refers to them as the Seraphim. Now, the Seraphim are the ones who are in the palace of God saying, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. So they're pretty high up there in the order. But people say, oh, the word Seraphim, that means burning ones. And I feel like taking the head and giving somebody a whack on the side of the head, saying, that's what you get for not understanding Hebrew correctly. The Hebrew word for burning is soreth. And if they were burning ones, then they would be called sorethim. But it's very clear from the book of Isaiah that they're not called that. They're called seraphim. And the word seraph, that's exactly what Moses was told by God to put on the staff back in the book of Numbers. Clearly a reptilian. These are reptilian entities. And they're the good guys.
Next, Rav Bar Tzadok tells us that the reason Hava spoke with the serpent in the garden in the first place is that it appeared in a trusted form.
And that's the story of Adam and Eve, and with the reptilian in the garden. And remember the whole story of that snake? Let me ask you guys something. When was the last time you had a conversation with a snake? The one thing I love out here in Eastern Tennessee is you have the rural area, the remoteness, and you go walk out there, we find snakes all the time. And I have never once stopped a snake, say, yo, how are you doing? And the snake says, shh. And we have a conversation. Maybe we'll go out for lunch together. Come on, let's be realistic. But this snake spoke. Our sages said that this snake, the Garden of Eden, the Nachash, stood erect, had arms and legs. And not only did it speak with Eve, but there was no fear there, was there? Eve engaged in a conversation with the snake like it's normal, because it was in a trusted form.
Rav Bar Tzadok tells us that the fallen watchers are in control of the people who are running our society right now. In other words, the fallen watchers are in charge of the great men, the mighty men, the magistrates, and the men of great renown.
They control the minds of people, and they're in control of the minds of the people who are running our society right now.
Rav Bar Tzadok tells us that he received an invitation to communicate with a non-humanoid sentient being on Skinwalker Ranch, and then he was on international television. So before going there, he astral projected and communicated with this non-humanoid sentient being occupying a different dimension or a different realm. And he says that the sentient being then recognized the energy signature of Kabbalah and Kedusha. And of course he did, because Kabbalah is effectively Babylonian. And as we'll see next week, the fall of the Watchers is intricately tied to the Babylon mystery religions.
When I received the invitation, I said the first thing I'm going to do is remote view. I'm going to astrally project to the ranch. I'm going to seek out the entity and ask if I have permission from it to visit its home. I made such a projection a number of times, and I did contact that entity. And he gave me his name, but it's not for public dissemination. It's an old, what we would call earth spirit. Lives in a parallel dimension, but this is his home. He doesn't like everybody come poking around and bothering him. But I asked if I could come. He welcomed me. He says, by all means. He understood and the energy signature of Kabbalah and Kedusha, and we communicated within that context.
Now, I want to encourage everyone again to listen very closely and carefully to what Rav Bar Tzadok is saying. So he's already told us earlier that these are reptilian entities. He's also claimed that they're the good guys. Okay, well, now he tells us that these fallen watchers are malicious and malevolent, and that they are effectively animals. And not just animals, they're predatory animals, because they seek to lower the people's energy signatures, which is to say, to get them to lower their morality so that they can then feed off of the people's lowered energy signatures. So they have a built-in incentive to make the people walk worse. But Rav Bar Tzadok says that doesn't make them evil. Okay, how does that not make them evil? What point of view, what perspective are we adopting? That some being wants to lower our energy signatures so it can feed off of us, and that's not evil?
Well, when you approach one of these entities, you're not going to go shake its hand. It doesn't have a hand. It's not human, but it has thought. It has mind. It has presence. You go into a meditative state, you project out, and you talk to them. And they'll communicate with you. If they're malicious and malevolent, like I said, they're actually animals. at that psychic level, and they are feeders. They look to energy signatures of human beings that are able to be siphoned off from them, and they eat them. So many of these negative, harmful entities look to the lower vibrational signatures of human beings and corral human beings and siphon them and use them as food, which is why they do a lot of the things they do to manipulate people to act in what we would call immoral, improper ways. It lowers their energy frequencies that enables them to come and feed animals. Not in a negative, derogatory way. Like I put out, meat from my dogs, they're going to eat. That doesn't make them evil. One of my shepherds, my male shepherd, Crypto, ran down and hunted down a wabbit, and he ate it. I'm sure the rabbit was not that thrilled and thought Crypto was probably an evil demon. But as far as Crypto was concerned, it was a yummy lunch or dinner, as the case may be. Okay. That's how they look energetically. They don't think like us.
Next, Rav Bart Sadok tells us how he was asked to open up a vortex at Skinwalker Ranch in order to summon the non-human sentient being.
To open up a vortex. So we're filming, chatting, I'm telling people this stuff. They put it on the program.
We'll talk about the link next week, but then Rav Bart Sadok tells us that Buddhist Agartha sounds just the same as what we have been teaching, meaning Kabbalistically. He says everyone knows this. And again, we don't have a challenge with this because next week we're going to see how it all stems back to the fallen watchers.
All of these peripheral teachings, Agartha, and the Buddhist tradition, sounds just like what we've been teaching. Everyone knows this.
Now, just to mention it, I had to go look it up. So Agartha, and I went, is that the book that we just saw this week? And no, so we saw a link between not Kabbalah and Agartha, but a link between Kabbalah and Vedanta. But effectively, you're going to find links between Kabbalah and Buddhism because of the Chaldean oracles and because of the role of the Watchers. We'll talk about that next week. So the next quotation he tells us that these fallen Watchers, these Shadim, these non-human sentient beings, very much have their own agenda. Okay, they're not doing things that are good for us. They very much have their own agenda. He doesn't say they're following Yahweh. He says they very much have their own agenda. And it says they have very much hybridized themselves to take on human form. What does that sound like?
They are very much with their own agenda. They have very much hybridized themselves to take on human form. And physically, they are 100% DNA perfect human beings. But their energy signature shows that they are not human at all. We call them by all kinds of different names. We know about them.
So we're going to skip over the Haftarah just due to lack of time. We're going to come straight to the Brit Chadasha portion. We just have a few verses that witness of one Enoch, or the Book of the Watchers. So one of the most obvious is Yehuda, or Jude. There's only one chapter, but verse 6. And it says that the messengers, or the fallen watchers, the sons of Elohim, who did not keep to their proper domain, but they left that dimension, they left the spiritual realm, and they left their own abode. So for those fallen watchers who didn't want what he wanted for them, he has reserved them in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. 1 Enoch speaks of that. Now we come to Kepha Bet, or 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. Kepha, or Peter, tells us that if Elohim did not spare the messengers, the sons of Elohim, the fallen watchers who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. And this is what Enoch says, is they're being held in another dimension, in the earth or under the earth. So they're in another dimension. They want to astral project and contact us. Now we have rabbis and others wanting to astral project and contact them, even though this was one of the greatest original mistakes of all time. So we come to Yohanan or John chapter 1, starting in verse 12, and we see the solution. We see the way out of this whole thing. He says, but as many as received Yeshua, really received him, not just believe on him a little bit, but they received him. He gave the right to become children of Elohim to those who believe in his name. And again, this is not the Greco-Roman Babylonian intellectual version of belief where you think Yeshua is the Messiah, but this is the Hebraic form of belief where you show fruit of true belief. You show fruit of faith, and you begin to do the things that Yeshua says to do. That's proof of the belief. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith. That's what it takes to become a child of Elohim. He says, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man wanting to be something he's not, but who were born of Elohim. In other words, they're going to manifest the fruits of that real and true spirit. And Shaul asks us a question in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 3. He says, do you not know that we shall judge messengers? That's explained in the book of Enoch. So we will see again next week in Dr. Chris Koster's work where the Babylonian mystery religions come from and how they got hidden in the church, in the synagogue, and in the mosque. So please join us again next week. Shalom.